Hello, my dear friends. Imagine for a moment that the world around you begins to slow, not because of peace, but because nature has begun to tighten its cold grip. The year is somewhere in the Middle Ages, centuries before heaters, warm lights, insulated houses, or even the simple comfort of a hot water bottle. As the days shorten, people watch the sun sink earlier and earlier, leaving villages wrapped in darkness long before dinner time. Winter is not just a season. It feels like a powerful presence, something people must respect, fear, and survive. The air grows sharper, each breath a small cloud of white fog, and the winds slip through wooden homes as if the walls aren't even there. In this world, winter is not gentle. Winter is a test. Now imagine yourself stepping into a medieval village. The houses are small, built from rough timber, mud, and thatched roofs that never fully keep the cold out. Farm animals huddle in barns with walls so thin that the wind whistles through them. People do not smile much at this time of year. Instead, they wrap themselves in wool cloaks that scratch their skin but offer the only warmth they can afford. Food becomes scarcer by the day. The vegetables stored from the summer harvest begin to rot, and the salted meat hanging in the rafters grows harder and drier. Children cough more often. The elderly move slower, their hands trembling from the cold that settles deep into their bones. And yet, everyone knows this is just the beginning of winter. As the sun continues to rise late and fall early, the village becomes quieter. The cold pulls people indoors, where fires burn low and smoky. Medieval homes rarely have chimneys, so the smoke simply floats inside, coating the walls and filling the air with a heavy, dark smell. It stings the eyes, leaving families blinking and rubbing their faces. But without the fire, they would freeze. They sit close to the flames, sharing heat from their bodies and from the small fire that must last the entire night. Outside, the wind howls across open fields and forests, rattling shutters and shaking loose bits of thatch from rooftops. It almost feels as if the season itself is alive, watching, waiting, testing everyone's strength and patience. In this era, winter does not simply bring cold, it brings danger. Roads become muddy, frozen, or completely impassable. Villagers cannot travel to nearby markets for food or help. Snow piles against doors, trapping people inside for days. If someone becomes sick, there is no doctor coming to help. If animals die, there is no replacement. If the harvest was poor, families must ration food carefully, sometimes skipping meals, sometimes eating only thin soups made from boiled roots. Hunger becomes a familiar visitor in many homes, sitting beside families at their tiny wooden tables. The fear of running out of food is always present, settling over the village like a silent shadow. And yet, in the slow hours of winter evenings, there is a strange kind of peace. Families gather around the little fire and speak in soft voices. Parents tell stories from generations past, tales of spirits in the woods, of brave ancestors, of good years and bad years. The winter forces everyone to stay close, to depend on each other. Outside, wolves prowl through the night, their howls echoing across the empty fields. But inside the homes, there is a fragile warmth, a gentle stillness that feels almost comforting. Children fall asleep wrapped in furs and wool blankets. Adults watch the fire carefully, making sure it never dies before morning. Every spark and ember becomes precious. This is where our journey into medieval winter truly begins. A world where night lasts long, food runs short, and warmth becomes the most valuable treasure. But to understand why winters were so brutal, we must look deeper into the life, the struggles, and the daily challenges that ordinary people faced, step by step, season by season, breath by cold breath. As winter settles deeper into the medieval world, warmth becomes the most precious thing a person can possess. Imagine waking up at dawn, not because you want to, but because the cold has crept through your blanket and touched your skin like icy fingers. The fire that kept your family alive through the night has burned down to faint orange embers. The room is dark, quiet, and filled with the chill of the morning air. You can almost hear the cold, a stillness so heavy that it presses against your breath. There are no heaters, no electric blankets, no glass windows to keep out the frost. The walls are made of wood sealed with mud, and the roof is straw. Every crack becomes a doorway for winter to enter. Someone must rise from bed to bring the fire back to life. Usually it is the mother of the house or the eldest child. They kneel beside the hearth and gently blow on the fading coals, hoping they will glow again. If the fire dies completely, the family must go outside to fetch new firewood, a task that feels almost impossible before sunrise, when the world is frozen and the air stings with every breath. People burn wood very carefully because wood itself is limited. Cutting it, gathering it, and carrying it home is a heavy task, especially when the ground is covered in snow. Some families burn dried animal dung or small branches, anything that can keep a flame going for just a little longer. Even once the fire is lit, the heat barely spreads beyond a few feet. Medieval homes are not insulated. They are more like shelters than actual houses. You can sit near the flames and feel warm on one side of your body, while the other side still feels cold and stiff. Children often sleep together, pressed tightly to share body heat. Adults wrap themselves in layers of wool and fur, though the wool is rough and often wet from snow or mist. Clothing rarely dries completely in winter. It remains cold, damp, and heavy. As people step outside into the morning, the frost clings to the ground in silvery sheets. Water in buckets is frozen solid. Livestock needs tending, but even the animals look miserable. Their breath rises like smoke, and their bodies shiver from the cold. Farmers struggle to break ice from the water troughs so the animals can drink. Chickens stop laying eggs. Cows give less milk. Horses grow thin. The entire rhythm of life slows under the weight of winter. Walking anywhere becomes a challenge. The roads are muddy, or frozen like stone, or hidden beneath patches of snow that disguise deep holes. People slip, stumble, and sometimes injure themselves with no doctor nearby to help them heal. Traveling between villages becomes rare, and many people stay within only a few steps of their homes for months. The world outside feels distant, unreachable, locked behind nature's barrier of cold. Inside the small homes, smoke thickens the air throughout the day. The lack of chimneys means that whenever someone cooks or adds wood to the fire, the entire room becomes hazy. The walls turn black from soot, eyes sting, children cough. But without fire, there is no life. So families endure the smoke and hope the winter will pass quickly. Mothers warm small stones in the fire and wrap them in cloth to place at the feet of children. Fathers repair worn boots using scraps of old leather, because buying new shoes in winter is nearly impossible for most. Every task takes more effort during the cold season. Carrying water freezes the hands. Washing clothes becomes a painful job done only when absolutely necessary. Even baking bread requires careful planning, because wet flour hardens and yeast refuses to rise in the cold. People move slower, speak softer, and save their energy. Winter demands patience, and patience becomes a form of survival. And as the world darkens earlier each evening, families gather again around the fire. They sit close, shoulders touching, sharing the warmth of their bodies as much as the warmth of the flames. The crackling of burning wood becomes one of the few comforting sounds in the long, silent nights. Outside, the winds roar across fields and forests, but inside, the flickering fire becomes a small island of light in a sea of winter darkness. Day after day, villagers live in this rhythm. Wake up cold, fight the cold, sleep cold, survive, little by little, night by night, until the season allows them to breathe again. But winter is not finished yet, and the hardest parts are still ahead. As winter stretches on, the problem of staying warm becomes only one part of the struggle. The other, often more painful challenge, is finding enough food. Imagine opening the small wooden storage box in the corner of a medieval home. Inside, there are no fresh vegetables, no fruits, no meats wrapped safely in cold storage. Instead, there are only a few tough root vegetables, some dried beans, and perhaps a small sack of grains. Everything that can spoil has already spoiled. Everything that could grow has stopped growing months ago. In winter, food becomes a quiet fear that follows every family through the season. Most villages rely on whatever they managed to preserve before winter started. Some families dried fish, some salted pieces of meat, and others stored barley and wheat. But none of this lasts long. Salted meat is extremely hard and must be boiled for hours to soften. And even then, the taste is so strong that children often struggle to eat it. Grains stretch longer, but even they become infested with tiny insects as the storage weeks pass. Yet people cannot afford to waste anything. Whether a grain is cracked, dusty, or crawling with bugs, it is eaten. Hunger leaves no room for choice. Bread becomes the center of many meals, but winter bread is not soft or fluffy. It is thick, dense, and often mixed with whatever filler is available: ground acorns, dried peas, or even crushed tree bark. People knead it with cold hands, while the dough refuses to rise in the frozen air. When baked, the bread becomes heavy like a stone. Eating it requires strong teeth and slow chewing. Those with weak teeth, especially the elderly, struggle terribly. They often soak the bread in warm broth to make it softer, but even that broth is thin, mostly water flavored with scraps. Vegetables are limited to turnips, onions, and preserved cabbage. These vegetables last because they are tough, but after weeks and months of eating the same things, the body grows tired. People crave something fresh, something crisp and full of flavor. But winter gives nothing. No green leaves, no fruits, no herbs. Children sometimes dream out loud about berries or apples, as if remembering a distant world. Their parents listen quietly, unable to promise anything. Meals become rituals of hope. Families gather around the simmering pot, watching the steam rise, wishing the scent was stronger. They stir slowly, letting the warmth soothe their hands even if the food cannot fully satisfy their hunger. Everyone tries to hide their worry from one another. A father will say, "We have enough," even when he knows the barrel is almost empty. A mother will smile and give her portion to her child, pretending she isn't hungry. And children learn not to ask for more, because they know there is no more left to give. Sometimes when hunger grows sharper, people search the forests. They look for nuts, dried berries, or edible roots buried beneath snow. But they are not alone. Wild animals are hungry too, and winter makes them bold. Wolves come closer to villages, scavenging for scraps. Boars roam restlessly. And for people with weak health, even a small fall in the woods can be dangerous. So these searches, done quietly and carefully, carry fear with them. Even the animals on the farm feel the hunger. Chickens become thin, cows grow weak, goats give less milk. Families must decide how much of their stored food they can spare for the animals, because in truth, the animals also help them survive. A cow's milk might be the only fresh food a child tastes all winter. But when winter is long, even the animals cannot be fed properly. Some families lose livestock before spring returns, and that loss follows them into the rest of the year. The constant cold makes digestion slower, and tired bodies crave warmth more than flavor. People huddle near the fire while eating, hoping the heat will help their stomachs feel full. But hunger is a patient visitor. It stays with them day after day, whispering reminders that winter takes more than just comfort. It takes energy, strength, and peace of mind. Yet even in this harsh reality, families find small comforts. A warm bowl in the hands, the soft glow of firelight on the wall, a whispered story from an elder to distract the children from the emptiness in their stomachs. These quiet moments become a kind of survival too. Winter teaches people to appreciate anything that brings warmth, even if it is only the warmth of being together. But as the season deepens, new difficulties emerge, ones that come not from hunger or cold, but from the very structure of medieval life itself. As winter settles fully into a medieval village, the home, the place meant to offer comfort, becomes another challenge to endure. Imagine stepping inside a simple medieval house. There is no insulation in the walls, no glass windows, no sealed doors to keep out the wind. The walls are made of wattle and daub, thin wooden strips covered with mud and straw. In summer, this is enough. In winter, the cold slips through every small crack, every weak patch of clay, every hole in the straw roof. No matter how hard the family tries, warmth escapes faster than they can create it. The floor is just hard earth, and it stays icy even when the fire burns. People walk across it with thick wool socks, but the cold rises through the fibers as if the ground itself is breathing frost. The fire pit sits in the center of the room, its smoke drifting slowly upward toward a small opening in the roof. But because the opening has no cover, cold air also falls back into the house. The family breathes in a mixture of warmth and smoke, sometimes coughing quietly as the smoky air irritates their throats. But they endure it, because without the fire, the cold would take over completely. Furniture is simple and rough. The beds are wooden frames filled with straw, and by midwinter the straw becomes flattened, dusty, and itchy. Lying on it is uncomfortable, and every movement creates a soft rustling sound. People try to add fresh straw whenever they can, but in the cold months, animals need it more. A mother might fluff the bedding to make it feel warmer, but the moment anyone lies down, they feel the chill rising again from the cold planks beneath. At night, families sleep close together to share body heat. Parents, children, even grandparents often sleep in the same space. The youngest sleep in the middle, wrapped in layers of wool, their small breaths forming soft clouds in the air. But even this closeness cannot stop the cold. Many people wake up during the night simply because their feet have grown numb, or because their blankets have slipped to the side. Some whisper prayers before falling asleep again, hoping that morning will bring a little warmth. It rarely does. Clothing becomes as important as shelter. People wear the same wool garments day after day because washing clothes in winter is almost impossible. Water freezes quickly, and drying takes forever. So everyone layers whatever they have, tunics, cloaks, scarves, and hoods, until their bodies feel heavy under the weight. Children who grow quickly often wear clothes that are too small or patched many times. Wool scratches the skin, but they learn to ignore the discomfort. Warmth, even when rough and itchy, is a gift. Light is limited. Days are short, nights endless. Candles are precious and expensive, so people rely mostly on the dim flicker of the fire. Shadows stretch across the walls, making the room feel even smaller and more enclosed. In this low light, time moves slowly. Families work quietly, mending tools, weaving, repairing clothes, preparing food, anything to keep their hands busy so the cold feels less sharp. Conversations are soft, interrupted by long stretches of silence. Winter teaches them to slow down, to do everything gently because energy must be saved for the hardest moments. There is also the problem of moisture. The cold air inside the house is damp and sometimes frost forms on the inside of the walls. When people breathe out, their warm breath collects as droplets on the cold surfaces. By morning, these droplets freeze into tiny crystals. A father might scrape them away with his hand only for them to return the next night. Dampness makes the cold feel deeper, heavier, and harder to escape. Rodents search for warmth too. Mice slip into homes through small gaps looking for crumbs or grain. Families do their best to protect their food, placing it in wooden boxes or hanging it above the ground. But winter makes even mice desperate. Their tiny sounds in the night, scratching, nibbling, remind people that they are not the only ones struggling to survive the cold. Yet despite all these hardships, there is a quiet resilience in these homes. Families gather around the fire each evening, sharing the little warmth they have. A mother might tell an old story to distract the children. A father might repair a broken tool, knowing it will be needed when spring comes. Even when the cold presses in from every direction, there is a gentle determination in the way they keep going. As the nights grow longer and the air becomes sharper, another challenge rises, one that brings danger from illness, weakness, and the simple fact that medieval winters were unforgiving to the human body. Winter in the medieval world was more than a season. It was a test of survival. When the cold settled deeply into the land, the human body struggled to keep up. Food ran low, fires burned weak, and houses let in more frost than warmth. In these slow, freezing months, illness traveled easily, quietly, the way cold air slips through a broken door. Inside a medieval village, the first signs of winter sickness were almost always the same: tiredness, cough, and a heaviness in the chest. There were no vitamins, no warm soups full of nutrients, no doctors except a local healer with herbs and prayers. People faced the season with whatever strength they had left from autumn. A simple cough could turn dangerous. The damp air inside homes kept the lungs cold, and smoke from the fire irritated breathing even more. Children coughed through the nights, their small bodies shaking with each breath. Mothers held them close, trying to warm them beneath layers of wool. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it didn't. Food scarcity made everything worse. By the time winter reached its deepest point, most families were surviving on stored grains, dried peas, old bread, and whatever root vegetables they managed to save. Fresh fruit was a memory. Meat was rare, unless an animal fell sick or died, and water was cold enough to numb the fingertips, so people avoided drinking too much at once. With such limited nutrition, the body weakened slowly, not dramatically, just a little bit each day. A man might wake feeling too tired to chop wood. A woman might feel faint while grinding grain. Children grew thin, their cheeks pale, their energy fading as the cold pressed harder. Fevers were feared more than anything. A fever meant someone might not survive the night. Without medicine, people relied on herbal remedies. Thyme tea, garlic paste, warm cloths dipped in hot water. Sometimes these worked. Sometimes families watched helplessly as the heat of the fever rose and the strength of the person fell. Old age made winter twice as dangerous. Grandparents were often the first to fall ill. Their joints ached, their breathing slowed, and the cold reached into their bones. Families cared for them tenderly, covering them with extra blankets, sitting close, holding their hands. But winter was unforgiving. Even a minor illness carried risk. If someone grew too weak, the family faced heartbreaking decisions. Should they use their limited firewood to keep one person warm, or save it for the rest of the family? These choices were never spoken aloud, but every household felt the weight of them. Yet even in these difficult months, the medieval spirit did not break. People used small rituals to stay hopeful. A mother might hang dried lavender near the bed to ease breathing. A father might carve wooden charms for protection. Families whispered prayers at dawn and shared tiny bits of honey or broth to comfort the sick. When someone recovered, even slightly, it felt like a victory against the winter itself. A stronger cough today might mean easier breathing tomorrow. A bit of color returning to the face was enough to spark quiet relief. Survival came in small steps, slow moments, and fragile hopes. As the winter deepened further, the world outside the home grew quieter. Frozen fields, silent forests, empty roads, and the challenges of everyday life became heavier. Hunting, gathering, traveling, even fetching water took on a new kind of hardness. And slowly, quietly, the medieval family prepared to face the harshest period of the year, the heart of winter, when the world felt frozen, still, and endlessly long. As winter tightened its icy grip, the world outside a medieval home became almost unrecognizable. The roads that had once carried merchants, travelers, and farmers now lay silent under layers of frost. Dirt paths turned hard as stone. Footsteps echoed in the stillness, crunching softly across frozen ground. The air felt heavy, unmoving, as though the season itself were pressing down on the land. For most medieval people, winter was a time of staying in, not going out. Travel became dangerous even between nearby villages. The cold stung the lungs with every breath, and the wind could numb fingers through the warmest wool. Horses struggled to keep balance on icy paths, their breath rising like pale smoke in the morning light. Carts creaked and slipped, their wheels freezing in place if left too long. A simple journey that took half an hour in summer could take hours, even a whole day under winter's weight. Merchants stayed home. Pilgrims paused their journeys. Farmers moved only when absolutely necessary. And yet, there were times when someone had to leave the safety of the hearth. Perhaps a healer was needed in a nearby village. Perhaps food stores ran too low, and a hunter went searching for game in the forest. Perhaps a message had to be carried. News of a sickness, a death, a birth, or a plea for help. In those moments, stepping outside felt like facing another world. The forest looked different in winter. The trees stood tall and bare, their branches dark and skeletal against the gray sky. Snow muffled sound, creating a deep, eerie quiet, as though the entire world was trying to sleep. Even animals moved slowly, deer with cautious steps, wolves traveling in packs through the edges of the woods, their eyes reflecting faint moonlight. Travelers kept close to the main paths, avoiding the deeper forest where danger was harder to see. In the village, people walked with purpose. No wandering, no lingering, no unnecessary tasks. A man fetching water walked quickly, holding his breath against the harsh wind. A woman carrying grain from the storehouse tucked her shawl tightly around her face. Every movement felt heavier, slower, and colder. Fingers stiffened quickly, and even the strongest arms grew tired from the simple act of lifting firewood. The silence was the strangest part. Skies stayed dim for most of the day. Birdsong disappeared completely. Even the animals in barns made less noise, conserving energy. Inside the homes, this quiet changed how people lived. The long evenings stretched endlessly, filled with the soft crackling of firewood, the whisper of wool being spun, or the slow breathing of sleeping children. People told stories to fight the stillness. Old tales passed down through generations. Stories of spirits who roamed the forests in winter, of heroes who survived impossible storms, of ancestors who lived through winters even colder than this one. Moving between homes became rare, but when neighbors visited, it meant warmth in more ways than one. They brought news, shared small portions of bread, exchanged dried herbs or simple remedies. They checked on the elderly, the widowed, the families who struggled most. Winter softened pride and strengthened community. In the quietest season, human connection felt louder, and yet, despite all this togetherness, there was always a quiet fear beneath everything. A fear of frostbite, of illness, of getting lost in a storm, of slipping on ice during a necessary walk. No matter how experienced someone was, winter demanded respect. The land belonged to the cold now. Humans were merely enduring it. As nights grew longer and the cold grew sharper, medieval families realized that they were entering the hardest stretch, the deep winter months, when hope thinned as quickly as the firewood pile, and every journey outdoors required courage. As winter settled deeper into the land, one thing became impossible to ignore: the darkness. Far more than the cold, far more than the snow, it was the absence of light that shaped everyday life. In the medieval world, the sun disappeared early and returned late, leaving most of the day wrapped in a gentle, heavy dimness. People would open their eyes in the morning to a sky that still looked like night. The first tasks of the day were done by firelight or with the faintest blue glow seeping through small windows. And by the time afternoon arrived, the light already began to weaken again, sinking quietly toward evening. Imagine living in a time with no electricity, no lamps, no glowing screens to push back the dark. A single candle lit a whole room, its flame trembling softly as the cold air moved through the wooden walls. Every sound felt louder in the darkness. The crack of the fire, the whisper of wool blankets shifting, the distant howl of wind moving through the empty fields. Families gathered close, staying near the hearth not only for warmth, but for the comfort of seeing each other clearly. The darkness also changed work. Winter days were shorter, so farmers rose earlier, chores were done faster, and many tasks moved indoors. Men repaired tools, sharpened blades, mended broken fences, or carved wooden handles by the fire. Women spun wool slowly, the fibers glowing faintly in the light of the flames. Children sorted beans, shelled peas, or practiced simple household skills taught by their parents. All work slowed, stretching across the long evenings. No one hurried. Winter had its own rhythm and people moved with it. Outside, the world seemed asleep. You could walk through a medieval village at late afternoon and feel as though night had already taken over. The small houses looked like black shapes against the pale sky. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, drifting into the still air. No footsteps echoed on the streets. No laughter came from the fields. Even the animals rested earlier, curling up in corners of barns where they could share their warmth. For many people, the darkness brought a quiet, heavy loneliness. Days blended together in slow repetition. Wake up in the dim morning, gather around the fire, do the necessary chores, return to the warmth, listen to the wind outside, and wait for the sun to rise again. It was a life lived in half-light, a life that tested patience and spirit. Those who lived alone felt the weight of this darkness even more intensely. A single candle in a silent room became their companion through the long nights. To fight this gloom, medieval people created small traditions. They lit extra candles on feast days. They told stories of light returning, of seasons turning, of hope waiting beyond the cold. Parents often whispered old legends to their children, stories of the sun as a wandering traveler who would someday return stronger, bringing warmth back to the earth. And even though these tales were simple, they carried a quiet comfort, helping families endure the darkest hours. But still, every winter there were moments of doubt. Times when people wondered if the harvest would last, if the cold would ease, if spring would truly come back. The darkness could make even strong hearts feel fragile. And yet somehow, through ritual, routine, and the closeness of family, they endured. The nights continued to grow longer, and the world settled deeper into quiet shadow. But the people of medieval times knew one truth better than anyone. Even the longest darkness ends. Even the coldest winter eventually gives back the light. As the medieval winter deepened, warmth became more than a comfort. It became a slow daily struggle. People of that time did not have central heating, thick insulation, or heated rooms. Instead, the entire household depended on a single fireplace that burned at the center of the home. It was small, simple, and often the only source of heat during the coldest nights. Every evening, families gathered around it, forming a circle of quiet survival. The fire crackled softly, sending tiny sparks into the dim air, and each person leaned closer, trying to soak in as much warmth as they could before the night fully settled in. Imagine sitting in a medieval house as the wind presses against the walls. The wooden boards creak. Cold air slips in through cracks in the roof. The stone floor beneath your feet feels like ice. Even when the fire burns steadily, The warmth never reaches the corners of the room. Those corners stayed dark and chilled, untouched by the flames. People avoided them, preferring to stay close to the hearth where light and heat gathered together. Keeping the fire alive was a constant task. Wood was precious, not always easy to find, and families stored every piece like a treasure. Children were often sent into forests to collect fallen branches, dragging them home with numb fingers. Adults chopped larger logs by hand, their breath turning into pale clouds as it drifted through the air. Every bundle of wood meant one more night with steady heat. Every log was a small promise that the darkness would not win. And yet, even with all this effort, winter nights remained bitter. When people went to sleep, they wrapped themselves in thick wool blankets, layering them one over another until they felt a little shielded from the cold. Many families shared sleeping spaces not out of tradition, but out of necessity. Body heat kept them warmer than any blanket could. Parents slept near their children, old people slept near the hearth, and everyone listened to the soft hum of the fire fading slowly as the night stretched long. Sometimes the fire died unexpectedly. A sudden gust of wind slipped down the chimney. A log burned too quickly, and the room would begin to cool almost instantly. The cold crept back in like an invisible guest, moving across the floor, rising up the walls, touching sleeping faces. Someone would wake up, usually the lightest sleeper, and quietly rebuild the fire, feeding the flames so the house could breathe again. Outside, the cold was harsher. Frost covered the fields every morning, sparkling softly beneath the weak sunlight. The ground became hard as stone, so frozen that footsteps echoed as if on solid rock. Water left outside turned to ice. Streams slowed into silence, and the air carried a stillness that made every sound sharper, every movement slower. People moved carefully, leaning into the wind, keeping their cloaks close to their bodies. But within the home there was a kind of warmth that was not physical, the warmth of presence. Families talked softly around the fire. They shared simple meals, passing bread and warm broth from hand to hand. They told stories that stretched across multiple nights, continuing the tale each time the fire was lit again. These moments softened the weight of winter. They created a bubble of peace inside a season that was otherwise unforgiving. And as the fire glowed gently, people would drift into sleep listening to the quiet crackle of burning wood, to the distant sigh of the wind outside, to the slow, steady breathing of the ones they loved. Winter still surrounded them, cold and endless. But within that small circle of light, they found enough warmth to make it through the night. As the medieval winter settled deeper into the land, the world outside the home changed into something quiet, still and strangely heavy. Travel became more difficult with every passing week. Roads that were once busy with merchants, farmers, and travelers slowly emptied as the cold tightened its grip. Dirt paths turned stiff and uneven, the ground frozen so solid that even a single step felt hard beneath the feet. Carts stopped moving, horses struggled, and people stayed close to their villages, knowing that winter could be unforgiving to those who wandered too far. Imagine stepping onto one of those old winter roads. The wind brushes your face like a blade. Each breath comes out as a pale cloud, dissolving quickly into the freezing air. The landscape around you feels wide and silent, with bare trees stretching their branches like dark fingers against the sky. There is no bird song, No rustling leaves, only the distant whistle of the wind moving through empty fields. Even familiar places look different under winter's touch, covered with frost that glitters softly in the weak daylight. People who needed to travel did so with caution. They wrapped themselves in thick wool cloaks, their hoods drawn low, hiding their faces from the wind. Their steps were slow and deliberate, and every sound echoed in the cold air. The crunch of frozen soil beneath their boots, the clink of metal buckles, the soft rustle of layers of fabric. Walking alone felt strangely louder, as if winter amplified every small noise. Travelers carried torches or lanterns when the days shortened, because darkness arrived early and stayed long. The sun seemed to move gently across the sky, giving only a few hours of dim light before it disappeared again. In many villages, people avoided long journeys unless it was absolutely necessary. They knew the dangers well. A sudden snowstorm could arrive without warning, covering the road in minutes, hiding all landmarks, turning the world into a white blur. Travelers could lose their way, unable to tell where the path ended and the empty fields began. Even a short walk to a neighboring village became a test of endurance, requiring patience, experience, and a quiet awareness of the weather. Winter taught people to move slowly, to observe carefully, and to respect the world around them. Those who worked outside faced even harsher challenges. Woodcutters ventured into forests knowing that every trip was important for survival. Shepherds checked on their animals, guiding them through cold mornings and colder evenings. Farmers repaired fences, barns, and tools, their hands red from the cold, their breaths a constant mist. Every task took longer in winter. Everything felt heavier. But they moved with a quiet determination, understanding that these rhythms were part of life itself. At night, the roads became empty. Lanterns flickered in windows, but the world beyond them was dark and vast. Travelers who were still outside felt the cold deepen with each passing hour. The wind grew sharper, the silence thicker, and the landscape seemed to stretch endlessly as if winter had swallowed all familiar shapes. It was a time when most people chose to stay indoors, listening to howling winds from the safety of their hearths. Yet even with its challenges, there was a strange beauty in these winter roads. The moonlight reflected off frost-covered branches, creating silver outlines around every tree. Footprints left delicate patterns on the frozen ground. Snow settled quietly on rooftops, softening the edges of houses and barns. And in those rare moments when everything grew perfectly still, the entire world seemed to exhale, wrapped in a peaceful, icy calm. This was the world medieval people walked through. A world shaped by cold, quiet, and patience. A world where each journey meant trusting your footsteps, your senses, and the small lantern you carried with you. A world where winter changed everything, from the way people traveled to the way they understood the land itself. As winter deepened, the nights grew impossibly long in the medieval world, stretching across the land like a heavy blanket. Darkness arrived early, often before people finished their evening tasks, and it lingered long after dawn should have returned. The hours between sunset and sunrise felt endless, slow, and quiet, shaping the rhythm of life for almost everyone. With little daylight to work under, people adjusted their routines to match the season, moving softly through these extended nights with a mix of patience and caution. Imagine sitting inside a small wooden cottage as the sky outside fades from pale gray to deep blue. and then finally to the rich, silent black of night. The only light in the room comes from a gentle fire burning in the hearth, its glow flickering softly on the walls. Shadows stretch across the floor, shifting slightly whenever the flames move. The warmth of the fire feels precious, almost fragile, as the cold presses against the walls from every side. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks, reminding everyone that winter still reigns beyond the door. Families gathered close during these long nights, not only for warmth but also for comfort. The darkness outside brought a sense of vulnerability, and the cold made the world feel distant and harsh. So people shared stories, whispered prayers, and spoke softly to pass the time. Children listened to tales of old heroes, spirits, and distant lands. Parents repaired tools, knitted clothing, or prepared small tasks that could be done indoors. Every action was slow and deliberate, guided by dim firelight and the soft hum of wind outside. Sleep came in different patterns during these long winters. Medieval people often slept in two segments, a first sleep and a second sleep. After the first few hours of rest, many would wake naturally in the quiet middle of the night. During this peaceful period, they might sit by the embers of the fire, whisper with family, or simply lie still, letting their minds wander gently. The world felt hushed, as if time itself were moving more slowly. Then, after some quiet moments, they returned to bed for their second sleep, letting the long night carry them toward dawn. The cold made every small task more difficult. Fetching water became a challenge because buckets froze quickly. Maintaining the fire required constant attention. Logs burned faster in the dry winter air, and without enough wood, the temperature inside could drop dangerously. People wrapped themselves in layers of wool and fur, pulling blankets tightly around their shoulders, grateful for every flicker of heat. Sometimes the cold was so sharp that even the breath of sleeping people created tiny clouds inside the house, fading into the warm air above. Outside, the nights were even quieter. The land lay still, frozen beneath the stars. Snow-covered fields reflected pale moonlight, giving the world a soft, almost glowing appearance. Trees stood silently with bare branches, and the distant hills looked like frozen waves in a sea of white. No insects buzzed, no birds sang. Even animals stayed hidden in their dens, conserving energy for survival. The entire landscape felt paused, held in winter's gentle but firm grip. Yet in this stillness there was a kind of peace. People found comfort in the predictable rhythm of winter nights, in the way the fire crackled softly, in the slow breathing of sleeping children, and in the deep quiet that settled around them. These long nights reminded them to rest, to reflect, and to stay close to one another. Winter may have been brutal in many ways, but it also brought moments of calm that felt almost sacred. Moments when the world outside was silent, and the world inside was gently glowing. As the hours passed and the sky began to lighten once more, there was always a subtle feeling of relief. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the horizon in pale shades of blue and gold, promising a few hours of weak but welcome daylight. Families stirred from their second sleep, wrapped in blankets, stretching gently as they prepared to face another day in winter's embrace. The long night was over, but the cycle would repeat again, soft, quiet, and endlessly patient. As winter tightened its grip on the medieval world, Warmth became more than just a comfort. It became a quiet battle that every family fought every single day. The cold seeped into everything, into the walls, into the floors, into bedding, into clothing, even into bones. People woke up shivering, their breaths forming pale clouds in the dim morning air, and the only thing standing between them and the freezing world outside was the fire they carefully kept alive through the night. This fire was not just heat, it was survival, and tending it became one of the most important rituals of winter life. Imagine the cottage at dawn. The sky outside is still pale and weak, and no sunlight has yet reached the frosted earth. Inside, the house is cold except for the faint glow of embers resting beneath a layer of ash. These embers are precious, small, glowing pieces of life that must be preserved. Before anything else, someone in the family rises quietly, wraps themselves in wool, and kneels by the hearth. Their hands move gently as they brush away the ashes, revealing the glowing heart of last night's fire. They place dried twigs around it, breath warm air onto the embers, and slowly coax them back into flame. If the fire catches, relief washes over the entire household. If it doesn't, the morning becomes much harder. To relight a fire in winter meant stepping into the freezing air to gather dry wood or kindling, which was not always easy to find. Snow, frost, or dampness ruined most materials. In many places, people shared coals between neighbors, walking carefully through the cold with smoldering embers wrapped in cloth. Losing a fire was like losing the rhythm of the day. It delayed cooking, delayed warmth, delayed comfort, and increased the danger of illness. So every ember mattered, every spark mattered, and every flame was treated with a respect that modern people rarely think about. Inside the home, the fire became the heart of winter life. People gathered around it not only to stay warm, but to cook, to talk, to mend clothing, and to plan their days. Children played near it, soaking up every bit of heat. Elderly family members sat closest to it, wrapped in heavy blankets, their faces illuminated by the orange glow. Even animals, cats, dogs, sometimes goats or chickens, found their way near the hearth, curling up in the warmest corner they could find. The crackling of wood became a soft music, a reminder that warmth still existed in a world swallowed by winter. Yet even with the fire burning, the cold never fully went away. It lingered in corners of the room, pressed against the walls, and crept through cracks under the door. Drafts of icy air moved like invisible fingers across the floor. People wore layers of wool and linen even inside their homes. They wrapped cloth around their heads and feet. Many slept in their daytime clothes because the night air was simply too cold to face without protection. Blankets were thick but often rough, made from whatever materials the family could afford. And still, the cold found a way to touch every inch of the house. Gathering firewood was another constant challenge. Families needed to prepare for winter months in advance, cutting and drying wood during the summer when the sun was strong. But even the most prepared families could run short. Wood burned quickly in winter, especially when used day and night. Those who ran low sometimes had to gather fallen branches in the snow, breaking them with numb hands, or barter with neighbors for anything that would burn. In poorer villages, people burned peat, dried animal dung, or straw, materials that created smoke but only a little warmth. Every piece of fuel was treasured. At night, the fire was allowed to die down, not fully extinguished but left with a quiet glow. Families banked the embers with ash, so they would last until morning. Before sleeping, people often sat for a moment by the fading light, watching the final sparks flicker. There was something calming in that moment. The softness of the light, the gentle warmth against the coming cold, the peaceful stillness as the world settled into darkness. These winter nights felt long and heavy, but also strangely intimate, as if the darkness outside brought families closer together inside. And so fire never truly slept. It dimmed, it rested, but it always stayed alive. It was the heart of the home and the quiet guardian of winter, offering its soft orange glow to those who depended on it. Even today, imagining that tiny medieval cottage, glowing softly in a world of frost, brings a strange feeling of comfort, because in that small space, wrapped in warmth and shadows, people found a way to survive the most brutal season of their lives. As winter tightened its fist around the medieval world, the cold was not the only enemy people faced. Hunger also crept quietly into homes, slow and steady, pressing its weight on every family. Food in winter was not something you expected fresh or plentiful. It was something carefully saved, rationed, and prayed over. Each meal was a reminder of how long winter still had to go, and how wisely the household had prepared in the months before. The fear of running out of food was never loud or dramatic. It lived in the quiet corners of the mind, always present, always whispering. Imagine a small wooden storage room attached to a medieval cottage. Inside, shelves hold clay jars, dried herbs, small sacks of grain, and a few precious baskets of vegetables that had been preserved or stored in cool darkness. Some families might have a wheel of cheese covered carefully in wax, or smoked meat hanging from beams above. But none of these stores were abundant. Each item had a purpose. Each piece of food had a future meal already planned for it. Nothing was ever wasted, and nothing was ever taken lightly. Winter food was not eaten with pleasure. It was eaten with awareness. Most winter meals were simple, soft, and repetitive. Thick porridge made from barley or oats, boiled with water and maybe a pinch of salt if a family was lucky. Sometimes a few dried beans or pieces of carrot were added. Bread, when available, was dense and hard, often dipped in hot broth to soften it. Families stretched every meal as far as possible. A pot of stew might be reheated for days, growing thinner with each passing sunrise. Spices were a luxury far beyond the reach of common people, so flavors were mild and plain. Food existed to sustain the body, not to delight it. In many homes, the mother or eldest daughter quietly managed the winter pantry. She knew exactly how much grain was left, how many onions had softened, which vegetables could be saved and which needed to be eaten before they spoiled. She checked jars for cracks and baskets for frost damage. She rationed portions with a careful hand, making sure every member of the family had enough to keep going, but never so much that supplies would run out too soon. This task required wisdom, patience, and a calm awareness of the season's long, slow passage. During harsh winters, even the smallest food became precious. A single apple stored since autumn might be sliced into thin wedges and shared among several people. A bit of honey, if a household had any left, was a treasured treat saved for someone who was weak or ill. Children often asked for more food, but winter taught them early that there simply wasn't any. They learned to be grateful for warmth in their belly, no matter how simple or modest. Families told stories during meals to distract from the plainness of the food, to make the moment feel full even if the bowls were not. Some days, when storms raged outside, gathering food became dangerous or impossible. Snowed-in roads, icy ground, and bitter winds made travel difficult. Hunters rarely caught anything in deep winter. Animals hid or migrated. Gathering firewood or searching for dried plants required courage and careful timing. So people stayed indoors when they could, trusting only in what they had saved. This created a slow, almost dreamlike rhythm to the days. Eat a little, rest, tend the fire, repair what could be repaired, tell stories, sleep early, and hope the pantry would last until spring. Despite the scarcity, winter brought its own unique moments of quiet beauty. Families ate together in the warmest corner of the home, the orange glow of the fire casting soft shadows on their faces. The steam rising from a wooden bowl felt almost magical on cold fingers. Children pressed close to their parents, feeling safe even as the world outside lay frozen and silent. In those moments, food was more than nourishment. It was comfort, warmth, and a reminder that even the harshest season could be softened by togetherness. And though hunger was always near, people found ways to endure. They trusted the earth would wake again, that the silent snow would one day melt, and that spring would return with new life, new color, and new hope. Until then, each simple meal was a small victory over winter, a quiet declaration that life would continue, one warm spoonful at a time. As winter nights stretched longer than the days, people in medieval times slowly adjusted their lives to match the rhythm of darkness. When the sun dipped below the horizon early in the evening, it was as if the world gently whispered that all activity should slow down. Homes glowed softly with firelight, and the long, cold nights created a kind of quiet that wrapped around everything, comforting at times, but heavy at others. Sleep came earlier, but it did not always come easily, for the cold often reached even the warmest corners of a cottage. In these long evenings, families gathered close around the hearth, the only true source of heat in most homes. The flames crackled softly, creating a rhythm that soothed tired minds and weary bodies. While the fire burned, people made use of the hours by working on small tasks that could help them through the winter. A father might mend tools or repair a broken hinge. A mother might sew a torn sleeve or patch a blanket. Children braided cord, cleaned pottery, or sat listening quietly as stories filled the dim room like warm smoke. The darkness outside felt endless, stretching far beyond anything the eye could see. In deep winter, many believed the night held spirits, mysteries, and unseen creatures. This belief wasn't born from fear alone, but from the simple truth that long darkness makes the world feel more mysterious and alive. People respected the night, keeping doors shut tightly and windows covered. They trusted the fire to protect them from both the cold and the unknown. Inside, the quiet work of survival continued. Wool that had been spun during autumn was now woven into cloth. Wooden bowls and spoons were carved with slow, careful strokes. Leather was softened, shaped, and stitched into belts, pouches, and repairs for worn shoes. Even children had small jobs, rolling thread, sorting dried herbs, or helping stir a pot so thick with grains that it moved like slow mud. These tasks might seem small, but each one mattered. Winter was a season where nothing could be wasted. Not time, not food, not effort. And as the night stretched on, so did conversations. Families spoke softly about memories of warmer days, the golden afternoons of late summer, the fields full of life, the sound of birds returning in spring. These memories carried warmth of their own, filling the room with a gentle comfort that made the cold feel less sharp. Sometimes, an elder in the family shared ancient stories, tales of spirits that guarded the forests, heroes who braved the cold, or lessons carried from one generation to the next. These stories were more than entertainment. They were guidance, hope, and connection. The long winter nights also offered moments of reflection. Without the demands of planting, harvesting, or long hours in fields, people had time to think. They thought about the year behind them, the successes, the struggles, and the moments of joy. They thought about the future, though only in soft, cautious ways, because survival always came first. In the flickering glow of the fire, people found a calmness that felt almost meditative, a stillness created by the season itself. Sometimes on clear nights, someone might step outside for a moment to breathe the frozen air. The sky above would stretch endlessly, filled with stars so bright they looked like silver needles piercing the dark. The world was silent. No birds, no insects, no rustle of leaves. Just the soft crunch of snow underfoot and the gentle whisper of the wind passing over rooftops. In those moments, winter felt both vast and intimate, as though the entire world was holding its breath. And then, returning indoors, the warmth of the fire felt sweeter, more welcoming, reminding everyone that even the darkest nights could be softened by light, work, and togetherness. Winter demanded much from people, but it also gave something precious in return. Time to sit close, to remember, to dream, remember, and to quietly prepare for the world's awakening in spring. As the medieval winter settled deeper into the land, there came a point when the cold seemed endless, when the frost clung to every surface like a stubborn shadow, and when the days felt too short to hold any warmth. This was the part of winter people feared the most, the period when food began to run low, and every household felt the pressure of survival tightening around them like a quiet, invisible grip. By January and February, the generous supplies stored during autumn had already shrunk. Barrels that once stood heavy with grains now sounded hollow when tapped. Root vegetables stored carefully in cellars had begun to soften or sprout. Onions shriveled. Cabbages lost their crispness. And as for meat, that was a luxury most villagers rarely had in any season, let alone deep winter. The little they could preserve, salted, smoked, or buried in cold storage, was saved for true emergencies. Every bite now mattered. Meals became smaller, simpler, and heavier with the taste of necessity rather than pleasure. Thick porridge made from oats or barley, broth stretching the last bones of an animal slaughtered months ago, stale bread softened in warm water or dipped into thin stew to make it last longer. Children learned early what it meant to ration. A piece of cheese that once looked small suddenly became a precious treasure. A handful of dried peas could be the difference between hunger and strength for a family. Yet even in these lean moments, people held on. They had grown up with the rhythm of the seasons, and they understood that winter always tested one's endurance. Families gathered around the fire not just for warmth, but for comfort, reminding each other, through shared meals, whispered prayers, or simple silence, that they were stronger together. Still, the cold had a quiet way of wearing people down. not through sudden force but through slow, steady persistence. It was exhaustion that crept into bones, hunger that lingered like a shadow, and uncertainty that touched every decision. Outside, the world gave little relief. Forests were silent, offering few berries or herbs. Rivers froze, making fishing nearly impossible. Hunting during deep winter was dangerous, with animals scarce and paths buried under snow. Even firewood became precious, gathered carefully and burned slowly to make the supply last. Each log added to the hearth was a reminder that every resource had limits. Some homes stayed cold for hours at a time. Families huddled under blankets, conserving heat like a precious currency. In these difficult weeks, the community often became more important than ever. Neighbors shared what they could: a small sack of grain, a piece of salted fish, a few extra logs. Not out of abundance, but out of quiet understanding. Because winter, especially a hard winter, did not allow selfishness. A village survived together, or it struggled together. Stories were told of winters where generosity saved lives, and winters where fear kept doors shut. The difference between the two could shape memories for generations. Still, despite the challenges, glimpses of hope always remained. Some days the sun stayed in the sky for a few minutes longer. Some nights, the wind felt a little softer. And every so often, a family discovered they had a little more food than they thought, hidden behind a jar or tucked in a corner. These were small victories, but in winter, small victories mattered greatly. The harshest part of winter was not just the cold or the lack of food. It was the lingering question in everyone's minds. Will this be the winter that tests us beyond our limits? And yet, year after year, people endured. They found strength in routine, in togetherness, and in the simple, unshakable belief that spring would come. Because even when hope ran thin, it never disappeared completely. It remained like a faint ember in the ashes, waiting patiently to glow again. Now imagine the night stretching long and heavy over a medieval village. Darkness fell early, often by mid-afternoon, and the sun's warmth seemed to disappear entirely for hours that felt endless. There were no bright lamps or electric lights to chase away the shadows, only the flickering glow of hearth fires and the occasional candle. Imagine the soft warmth of a fire in the center of a small home, its orange glow reaching only partway across the room, leaving corners wrapped in gentle darkness. Families gathered close, huddling for warmth, sharing quiet conversations and watching the dancing shadows that seemed alive in the firelight. Outside, the wind pressed against wooden shutters and howled through gaps in the stone walls. But inside, there was a cocoon of fragile safety and comfort. During these long nights, stories became a lifeline. Parents and elders would sit close to the hearth, recounting tales not only to entertain but to teach, to soothe, and to inspire quiet hope. Imagine a mother describing a harsh winter from years past, how a distant village survived with little food, how clever children helped their families gather firewood from the forest, and how neighbors shared what little they had. Each story was slow, carefully told, with pauses that allowed the listeners to picture the scenes, imagine the cold snow, and feel the warmth of the fire through the words. The young children listened intently, eyes wide, faces illuminated by flickering flames, absorbing the rhythm of life in winter, the lessons of patience, endurance, and resilience. Stories were not always grand adventures. Often they were about small, quiet acts that could mean the difference between comfort and suffering. how a woman preserved vegetables in root cellars, how a man repaired a roof before the snow became too heavy, or how neighbors quietly lent a few extra coins or a portion of grain to help another family survive until spring. Each tale, though simple, carried a profound understanding of human endurance. Imagine the hush in the room as each sentence settles, the crackling of the fire punctuating pauses, the soft murmur of wind outside, all blending into a rhythm that feels slow, calming, and deeply grounding. These stories were gentle reminders that life, though sometimes harsh, could be met with patience, ingenuity, and community. In some homes, the firelight revealed the careful work of children learning winter crafts. They might sit near their parents, weaving straw into baskets or knitting simple garments, their small hands moving slowly and carefully. Even this quiet work became a part of the storytelling, a live demonstration of the lessons hidden in tales about patience, care, and the quiet rewards of steady effort. Imagine a grandmother's soft voice guiding a child's hands, correcting gently, and then returning to the tale of a wolf in the forest or a hidden spring that saved a village from thirst. The entire night flowed like a slow river, carrying lessons, warmth, and the subtle, comforting presence of human connection. Beyond the walls of the home, the night itself seemed alive with quiet movement. Imagine the snow-laden streets, empty and silent except for the occasional footstep of a villager returning from the stables, the soft jingle of a harnessed animal, or the distant bark of a dog. The trees creaked under the weight of frost, and ice sparkled faintly under the pale moonlight. Even in the dark, life was continuing, and those who remained awake could sense the delicate balance between the harshness of winter and the persistence of life. The long nights taught vigilance, awareness, and a deep appreciation for the small comforts within the home: warm blankets, shared stories, a fire that burned steadily through the hours. As the night deepened, these stories and quiet observations created a kind of gentle rhythm for life in winter. It was a rhythm dictated not by urgency or excitement, but by patience, endurance, and careful attention to the passage of time. Each story, each craft, each crackle of the fire contributed to a sense of security, a slow unfolding of knowledge and comfort that would carry the family through the coldest months. Imagine leaning back, feeling the warmth, listening to the gentle cadence of voices, and letting the quiet wisdom of centuries-old winters settle in your mind. There was a sense of timelessness here, of connection to generations past, and a slow, comforting reassurance that even in the harshest winters, life persisted with quiet dignity. Imagine stepping outside into the heart of winter, where the village streets end and the open fields stretch endlessly, blanketed in snow so thick it softens every sound. The world feels hushed, as if the snow itself has pressed a gentle finger to the lips of nature, asking for quiet. Trees stand bare, their skeletal branches etched sharply against the pale gray sky, and every twig and fence post is outlined in frost, sparkling faintly in the dim light. The ground beneath your feet crunches softly with each step, and the cold bites at your cheeks and hands, reminding you of the season's authority. In these frozen fields, survival is a slow, deliberate act. Farmers cannot till the soil, and most of the year's crops lie hidden beneath snow, waiting for spring. Animals, too, adapt quietly. Sheep huddle together in sheltered pens, their breath rising in misty clouds while oxen and cows seek out the sturdiest barns. Wild creatures move cautiously through the snow. Deer tiptoe across open spaces, their delicate hooves barely disturbing the pristine cover, while wolves roam farther than usual, searching for the scarce food that winter allows. Birds flit from branch to branch, gathering the last seeds that stubbornly cling to frost-covered shrubs. Every movement is slow, deliberate, and measured. Walking through a forest in winter is a lesson in patience and observation. Snow muffles most sound, and every footstep echoes with unexpected clarity. Imagine the sun, low in the sky, filtering through the bare branches, casting long, shifting shadows across the icy ground. Icicles hang from branches and rocks, catching the faint light like crystal ornaments, and the air smells sharp, clean, and slightly metallic with frost. In medieval times, people needed to understand this landscape intimately. They learned which paths were safe to cross, which trees offered firewood that would burn steadily, and where streams might freeze solid enough to walk over without breaking through. Nature demanded respect, and survival often depended on the quiet, careful study of the environment. Even ordinary tasks become extraordinary in these conditions. Gathering firewood requires slow planning and steady energy, as the snow can be waist-deep in places. Traveling to neighboring farms or villages is risky, each journey requiring caution and preparation. Imagine a man trudging through a snowy field, carrying a bundle of wood on his back, pausing to catch his breath, listening to the stillness of the forest, and noting the subtle sounds of wildlife around him. Every step is mindful, every breath precious, and yet there is a strange beauty in the quiet determination, in the deep, enveloping stillness of winter. The frozen fields also carry the silent stories of the past and the rhythm of life's endurance. Tracks in the snow tell where animals have moved, where neighbors have passed, and where small acts of kindness, an extra loaf of bread delivered, a fire lit for a weary traveler, have left their mark. Imagine following these tracks slowly, tracing the paths of those who lived and survived before, feeling the connection to generations who knew both the beauty and hardship of winter intimately. There is a quiet poetry in the frost, a slow, reflective rhythm that teaches patience and careful observation, and yet, even in this stark landscape, there is warmth to be found. Snow absorbs sound, creating an almost sacred silence. The air is crisp, refreshing, and full of life, even when it seems still. Imagine pausing on the edge of a frozen pond, watching the sun glint off ice, feeling a gentle wind and realizing that survival is not only about enduring hardship, it is about noticing the quiet beauty, the subtle miracles that appear even in the coldest, most challenging months. These frozen fields and silent woods are not only tests of endurance, they are teachers, offering lessons in patience, vigilance, and deep appreciation for the rhythms of life that continue regardless of winter's harshness. As we linger here in the forest and fields, feeling the snow beneath our feet and the cold brushing our cheeks, it becomes clear that medieval winters shaped every part of life. They dictated when people worked, what they ate, how they traveled, and even how they thought and reflected. Every step in the frozen woods, every careful gathering of firewood, every observation of animals moving silently through snow was part of a quiet, enduring dance with nature itself. Imagine walking slowly, absorbing the stillness, breathing deeply, and letting the calm, measured rhythm of winter guide your thoughts into a reflective, almost meditative state. This is the quiet power of medieval winter, the way it slowed life down, sharpened senses, and demanded both patience and resilience.